I'm not here to talk about gender equality or the fact that women are the equal of men, etc. I'm here to talk about the superiority of a particular gender. And we'll find out which one soon enough. Everyone today talks about collective intelligence. So, artificial intelligence is the talk of the town. It invades our cars, our homes, our phones, our office computers. At the same time, there is huge progress in neurosciences, understanding the brain, learning, memory, all kinds of cognitive biases. And all of this floods the media, the culture, and becomes so popular that it also invades the educational field. You can see in France, for example, pedagogy being impacted by the new learnings on brain sciences. So despite the howling winds of craziness that are circling the world today in all kinds of ways, it's clear that this new century is going to be defined by intelligence. Not only by women, by intelligence. And advertisers know it. Advertisers have spotted the trend. Everything has to be smart, right? You have smart cities, smartphones, smart, thermostats in our homes. Even I found smart detergent, right? I found that quite funny. But in addition to minds and machines, there is a third source of intelligence that is not being exploited and is not being hyped, which is the intelligence of our collective. We humans today are 7.7 billion. And we are increasingly connected by all kinds of technology. Social networks, emails, machine translation, etc. Our collective intelligence potential has never been so high as it is today. Moreover, you don't realize it, but the brain you have in your skull is capable, it has more computing power than 30 state-of-the-art Chinese supercomputers in terms of the number of mathematical operations per second it can do. The reason for that is that it does it all in parallel, whereas the supercomputer has to do it sequentially. 30 state-of-the-art supercomputers, that's also 500,000 game consoles, or 300,000 smartphones in terms of computing power in your skull. Right? So by this standard alone, all the cumulative power of all the computers in the world today are not even worth 1,000 human brains. And there's going to be 8 billion of them pretty soon. Right? So a great theologist, Teilhard de Chardin, used to say, nothing in the universe can resist a large enough number of minds grouped together and properly organized. When you put side by side the huge amount of computing power that the humanity has in their skull, together with the digital technology that allows all these brains to collaborate at a level never before possible, then you have to realize that we are entering a new era of intelligence, which I call the supercollective era, where our minds, properly organized and grouped together, are going to be able to shake the universe. But let's get back to Earth a little bit. Collective intelligence is based on two principles which are perfectly illustrated by these two interesting buildings. One of them built by termites with tiny brains, but huge in numbers, right? 1 million of these insects together can build this interesting cathedral of mud. The other one is built by a single individual brain. I mean, not built, but conceived by a single individual brain in Barcelona, the genius Gaudi. So what this illustrates is that, first of all, there is strength in numbers. Right? You take tiny individual brains of 200,000 neurons each. You multiply that by 1,000 of these individuals, or 1 million of these individuals, and you get a very interesting, moving building, almost innovative. In fact, it's very innovative. Usually they look like boring Trump towers or something, right? This one is more interesting. At the same time, with a single human brain, which have as many neurons as in the termite colony, if you make the computation, so half as many neurons, but better organized, are able to conceive the cathedral, which is much better than the termite mind. So strength in numbers, yes, but organization matters also a whole lot. So what do we know about the organization of collective intelligence? Well, before you study a phenomenon, you have to be able to measure it, right? So the psychology became a science when we started measuring IQ. So we could measure intelligence, the intellectual quotient about a century ago. And that's how psychology started as a science. So today, collective intelligence has started as a science not even a decade ago, in 2010, when people started measuring, they had the weird idea of measuring the intelligence of a group. So they took groups, it was done at MIT and Carnegie Mellon. They took groups and they measured, they had the group go through IQ tests, and then they measured the IQ of the group. And what they found was really interesting. They found that the IQ of the group exists. It's as tangible and measurable as the IQ of an individual brain. But also, even more interestingly, it was not entirely determined by the IQs in the group. It's not because you had smart people in the group, or because you had one super smart person in the group, perhaps the person with the right diploma, that the group was smart. It depended on something else, and they were surprised, very surprised to find that what mattered the most was the proportion of women in the group, right? So you probably have heard this already, but it's a huge finding in a way, but it's more interesting than just women. But first, look at the data, which is kind of cruel in its way. You see the percentage of women on the horizontal axis and the IQ of the group on the vertical axis. And what you see here is that if you have groups that are predominantly male, they tend to be below average in terms of IQ. Whereas groups predominantly women tend to be above average in terms of IQ. Right? So it's not all groups, it's statistical, etc., but the trend is very clear. Okay? Now, how do we explain this mystery? The group of researchers was mixed, by the way, gender mixed, But they were still very surprised, collectively, right? And the way they explain it, when they dig into the data, they found that, in fact, the groups that were the smartest were the ones that distributed more equally the speaking time. And in fact, there's no point being in a group if only one person is going to speak or monopolize the conversation, usually a guy, right? And that's not their fault. I mean, we saw this morning, some guy showed a beautiful picture of a peacock, right? A male peacock. Obviously, female peacock don't have to do that, right? So the evolution wants male to have this instinct of trying to be brilliant in society, and it's not necessarily their fault. Once they realize it, then they have to control it, right? So groups with better equal time, equal speaking time, were smartest, and those were the groups with more women in them, because women distribute speaking time more equally. Secondly, an even more powerful influence, even more powerful parameter, was the supplement of what we call in psychology social sensibility. Women have higher social sensibility. What is social sensibility? Social sensibility is the empathic ability to guess what the emotions of other people are when you are talking to them. And we measure that with this kind of test. We show you these very close framed pictures of people, and you have to decide, you have to guess what is the emotion behind those eyes. Right? So we do this with all kinds of men, women, old, young, etc. And out of a scale of 35 or 37 answers, we look at how many you got right. This one is distrustful, I believe. And then it turns out that when you look at the data, this is used to measure autism, diagnose autism in psychology. When you see the data is on the left, you have the men and women who are autistic. Every one of these dots is one person who took the test, right, in that particular population. So men and women who have autism, who are autistic, tend to be all over the place. Some are very good, some are really bad, right? If you took normal, in quotes, men and women, then you find that they tend to be closer to the top, to have better social sensitivity as a whole than autistic people. But at the same time, you can see that the average, the black dot, the average woman tends to be a little bit better than the average man. And this little statistical difference between men and women in this ability to increase, in fact, to understand what is not being said by just looking at the people you're talking to and listening better, is able to make that difference in terms of smarter groups when there are more women in them. That's the biggest driver of the collective IQ. So what does that mean? In fact, it means that rather than being opposites, the emotional quotient, emotional intelligence, and rational intelligence, they are not opposite, they are built on top of each other. And the rational intelligence of the group, the ability of a group to rationally solve a problem, is actually based on the individual ability of people in the group to relate to each other, and to listen to each other, and to collaborate correctly. Right? So it's like increasing the bandwidth or the quality of the connection between the brains in the group. And just like the internet, whose anniversary I think we celebrated last week, 30 years, the value of the internet is not driven by the quality or the power of the computers that are connected to it. Right? The value of the internet is the bandwidth. It's the 5G instead of the 4G and the 4G instead of the 3G, right? And if you don't have your little bands, your little bars on your computer, on your phone, then your phone is worthless, essentially, right? So it's the same thing in a group. It's the bandwidth between people that makes the group smart. And this spectacular result is not restricted to ivory towers at MIT and Carnegie Mellon. Right? It's not only an academic research result. It actually shines a very bright light on other phenomena that have been observed in the real world, in the real economy, one of which has been monitored by the Schema Business School in Paris with their Observatory for the Feminization of Business. For 10 years, they have looked at the profitability of the biggest French companies, and they found that those who have more women managers also tend to have higher profits than the others. Right? In fact, they invented something called the Femina Index, which tracks the 15 companies of the CAC 40 that have at least 35% women managers. Yes, there are only 15 of them, right? And you can see them actually listed on the side here. And what they found is that over 10 years, from 2006 to 2016 with a huge crisis, economic crisis at the beginning, and then followed by a period of renewed growth. During these two periods, the Femina Index companies, the more feminized companies, tended to do a whole lot better than the rest of the CAC 40 as a whole, right? Plus 60% over a decade compared to minus 4% for the CAC 40. And this is not only another French paradox. It's not only in France, it's not only big companies. Everywhere you look, similar studies have been done, in Denmark, Spain, USA, China, with big companies, small companies. You have the same result coming out every time. Women-run companies, not necessarily women-run, but companies with more women in them, more managers, women managers, are more innovative. Their products are more innovative, and their management is more innovative. So it's all over the world, and now we understand why. It's just because they're smarter, right? It's interesting because the Femina Index guys, they never even mentioned this idea of collective intelligence. They were not aware, perhaps, of the MIT results. But if you put the two and two together, it actually makes sense. So the first scientist who discovered what we now call the wisdom of the crowd about 100 years ago was this gentleman, Francis Galton, a cousin, a brilliant cousin of Charles Darwin. And he was quite an elitist. He didn't like the masses of common people. He was part of the aristocracy. He was very smart. He didn't think that most people knew what they were talking about, and especially in political arena, he didn't think that it was a good idea to give everyone the right to vote. Right? And at the time, just like we talk about a lot about referendum in France currently, at the time, giving the right to vote to everyone rather than just the lords was a big issue in England. So this guy, Francis Galton, at the end of his life, was old and sick and retired in the country, and he ran by a country fair, and he saw several hundred people all trying to guess the weight of an ox. And in fact, they were betting on their ability to do so by paying to buy a ticket on which they could write the weight of the ox, and then the person who had the better estimate would win something. And what Galton did, because he was a data scientist, at the time there wasn't that much data, he collected all the 787 tickets, and he took them home and ran some statistics on them. What he did is he ordered them by amount, and then he looked at the median, which is the one right in the middle. Right? So you have half the tickets were higher estimates, half were lower estimates. And what he found, he didn't expect it, was that there was almost no difference between what he called the vox populi, what we call now the wisdom of the crowd, and the actual weight of the ox. And then, since he was an English gentleman, he was very fair play, he decided that giving the right to vote to everyone perhaps was not such a bad idea, right? Interesting. I'm totally lost in my notes, but I'll get there. Okay. And that's because I'm almost at the end. So what Galton could not do, because he didn't have the personal computer or the mastery of a programming language like I did, was actually run a further analysis on the wisdom of groups of different sizes. So what Galton had done is look at the average estimate, which is about 4.5% mistaken compared to the actual weight of the ox. And then he looked at the the average of the estimates, which was almost perfectly right and had almost zero error all the way at the end of the graph there on the right. In the middle, I was able to recompute the error by groups of all kinds of sizes, any 2 individuals, any 3 individuals, any 4 individuals, 10 individuals, etc., and look at the error. And what you can see here are the 3 principles of the wisdom of crowds. So the first is that the average of the estimates is much better than the average estimate. Okay? The whole crowd is smarter than the average individual in the crowd. Secondly, larger groups are smarter. The error diminishes as you increase the size of the group. The more people there are, the smarter the crowd is. Okay? And thirdly, the way that the error diminishes is very interesting. It's called diminishing returns. So it sounds a little bit disappointing, right? Diminishing returns, right? You don't like that in business usually. But what it means is actually very encouraging. It means that the first person you go to ask for advice, to complement your own thinking, already gives you the maximum amount of benefit immediately, right? And then you go to a second person to do that, then you get still more improvement, a little bit less, etc. Here you can see that 10 people diminish the error by 3. And then if you take 100 people, you diminish again the error by 3, right? So that's a really hopeful thing, right? So we'll conclude pretty quickly. What it turns out, I want to show that there is a mathematical foundation to this. So I'm not asking you to read the equation. I know my editor said, don't put the equation in the book. I said, yes, we must put the equation because it's important to show that it's a mathematical truth. It's not just wishful thinking. What that mathematical truth means, I'm not asking you to verify it right now, but I'm telling you what it is that the error of a group, or you might call it the performance of the group, is a function of both the individual ability of people in the group, right? Plus the diversity of the opinions in the group. The more people think differently in the group, the more diverse their estimates are, for example, and the more likely it is that the error is going to be smaller, reduced. And that's a mathematical thing, right? So you can play, in fact, there are many examples of that in different fields, but you can usually replace expertise by diversity. You can replace, for example, if you want to make an estimate of the outcome of a trial where people are going to be awarded money if they win the trial, you can have very expert lawyers trying to do such a prediction, or you can replace a very experienced lawyer by 14 law students in school who have no experience, but they have very divergent thinking, very different thinking. Now, but the same thing applies for the expert. If the expert finds that he can diminish his ego enough to ask a colleague what he thinks, and then do the average of his opinion with somebody else's opinion, then he's also going to improve his performance. And now it takes 42 law students to have the same performance as 2 experienced lawyers together, right? But you can always exchange expertise with diversity. And today, with the technology, digital technology, it's rather easy, usually, to find a very large crowd to think about the problem that you want to submit to them, rather than going to McKinsey and asking for, a single expert advice that's very expensive. So depending on your resources and what you want to do, you can do one or the other, right? So I'm going to shift very quickly on this attorney thing. The important thing is that you can use that same wisdom of crowd to considerably improve, for example, the quality of geopolitical forecasts that are done by intelligence agencies in the US. In a 4-year experiment, we found that amateurs who are paid nothing, $200 a year, to answer all these questions from the CIA were able to do up to 30% better than the analyst experts, very well paid at Langley, by combining their different views of the world. rather than relying on a single expert view of the world. So we know that crowds are supposed to be stupid. You know, there are lots of interesting philosophers who have told us so. Crowds tend to make people stupid. They're always inferior to the individual. But there is a recipe to collective intelligence. And this is the recipe. If you follow it, you generate smartness. If you don't, you create folly and stupidity and fake consensus. So the recipe is here. First of all, go on the field to gather specialized knowledge. That's called decentralization. That creates a lot of diversity of points of views, which you must cultivate. It's very important to cultivate diverse opinions. And finally, there's no point having all these diverse opinions if the process of the group doesn't encourage people to actually say what they have on their mind independently, right? So if they are pressured to conform, then they might think something and tell you something else, then you lose the advantage of having all this diversity in the group, right? So it's very important to put together independent thought processes. And then finally, some objective way of aggregating this through a vote, an equation, algorithm. What we particularly like in my company is having people bet against each other, because when you bet against each other, you have to disagree. And when you have to disagree, you have to be true to what you really think, right? You're never going to bet on something you don't really believe, right? So that's a good way to do so. So to those who distrust the masses, we can confidently point out that the enemy of intelligence is not quantity, it's not number of people, it's conformity. And to the philosopher immersed in splendid solitary thought, we can maliciously suggest that perhaps the best friend of wisdom is not isolation, but diversity.